Billionaire'S quintuplets lost everything until the new Maid changed his life in seconds. The crash and the code. The rain did not just fall against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Sterling Global penthouse. It assaulted it. 100 stories up, the storm over New York City felt personal, a chaotic mirror to the catastrophe unfolding inside the executive suite. Alexander Sterling, a man whose net worth hovered in the 11-figure range, sat slumped at his obsidian desk. His forehead rested in the palm of his hand, his fingers digging into his scalp, as if trying to physically extract the panic rising in his brain. The only light in the cavernous modern office came from the wall-sized monitor behind him, pulsing with a terrifying, rhythmic red glow. System failure. Critical breach. Decryption failed. The words blinked in time with his racing heart. $10 billion. That was the estimated loss if the trading algorithms didn't come back online within the next 20 minutes. His entire empire, built on the ashes of his grief, was evaporating into the digital ether. Tech support is non-responsive, Mr. Sterling. His intercom buzzed, the assistant's voice trembling. They say the code is unrecognizable. It's alien script. Fix it, Alexander roared, slamming his fist onto the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I don't pay you to tell me it's unrecognizable. I pay you to fix it. He severed the connection, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He felt the familiar constriction in his chest, the walls closing in. But tonight, the suffocation wasn't just financial. It was physical. Standing right next to his elbow, lined up in a surreal, silent row, were 5 identical 5-year-old boys. Noah, Liam, Ethan, Mason, and Oliver. The Sterling quintuplets. They were dressed in matching navy blue t-shirts that cost more than most people's cars, yet their faces were smeared with what looked like chocolate and tears. They stood frozen, 10 wide eyes staring at the pulsing red screen, then shifting to their father's terrified face. They were a hive mind of anxiety, vibrating with the tension filling the room. Please, Alexander whispered, his voice cracking, looking at them with a mixture of helplessness and resentment. Just sit still. Don't touch anything else. Where is Mrs. Gable? Mrs. Gable, the 5th nanny in 2 months, had walked out 40 minutes ago, muttering something about uncontrollable demons after Mason had poured juice into the main server vent. The boys didn't move. They didn't speak. They rarely spoke to him. Since their mother died birthing them, Alexander had provided them with castles, but he had never learned how to build a home. They were strangers living in his museum. The office door hissed open. Alexander didn't look up. If that isn't the solution to my problem, get out. Just emptying the trash, Mr. Sterling. Shift change. The voice was low, melodic, and startlingly calm amidst the storm. Alexander looked up. It was the night cleaner. He didn't know her name. He had seen her occasionally, a shadow in a black and white uniform, pushing a cart, head down. She was a black woman with eyes that seemed too old for her young face, carrying a weary grace that commanded attention even in a maid's uniform. Maya Williams froze, her hand gripping a trash bag. She took in the scene, the billionaire on the verge of collapse, the terrified row of identical children, and the apocalyptic red screen. She should have turned around. It was protocol. Instead, she stepped forward. Sir, she said softly. Not now, Alexander snapped, turning back to the keyboard, furiously typing override commands that were instantly rejected. Maya didn't leave. She walked past the leather sofas, past the wet bar, and came to the edge of the massive desk. She wasn't looking at Alexander. She was looking at the screen, and then, curiously, down at Oliver, the youngest of the 5, who was hiding his hands behind his back. It's not a hack, Maya said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the acoustic perfection of the office it carried like a bell. Alexander stopped typing. He spun his chair around, his eyes blazing with fury. Excuse me? The screen, Maya said, pointing a calloused finger at the pulsing red text, the rhythm of the flash, and the code scrolling at the bottom. This is military-grade encryption disruption, Alexander spat, his patience vaporizing. What could you possibly know about— It's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, she interrupted gently. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Alexander blinked, his mouth slightly open. What? Maya knelt down, ignoring the grime on the expensive carpet, bringing herself to eye level with the quintuplets. The boys, who usually flinched at sudden movements, leaned toward her. They smelled the faint scent of lavender soap and safety. You were playing on Daddy's big keyboard, weren't you? Maya asked them, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum. Like a piano? The boys exchanged glances. Slowly, Noah nodded. Maya looked up at Alexander, her eyes clear and unafraid. They didn't hack you, Mr. Sterling. They were trying to play music. The code isn't random. It's the notes. C, C, G, G, A, G. Alexander looked at the screen. He looked at the scrolling nonsense characters. C, C, G, G. The system locked because it detected a pattern input on the command line and interpreted it as a brute force attack, Maya explained, standing up. She moved with a confidence that didn't fit her station. May I? Alexander was too stunned to object. He gestured vaguely at the $10,000 terminal. Maya leaned over the desk. She didn't type code. She didn't call tech support. She simply pressed the escape key, held down function, and typed a sequence of numbers. 1205, 1205. The boy's birthday, she murmured, followed by the musical scale reset. She hit enter. The red screen flickered once, twice. Then the angry crimson dissolved into a soothing, cool blue. System restored. Trading resumed. The graphs on the screen shot upward. The billions were safe. Alexander sat frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs, the adrenaline crash making him dizzy. He stared at the screen, then at the woman in the maid's uniform who had just saved his legacy with a nursery rhyme. How? Alexander rasped, his voice unrecognizable. How did you know that? Maya smoothed her apron, her face returning to a mask of professional invisibility. I listen, sir. I clean this office every night while you work. I hear you muttering your passwords. And I have brothers. I know what mischief looks like. She turned to leave, grabbing her trash bag. I'll come back later to finish, Mr. Sterling. She took one step, and suddenly, she couldn't move. 5 small bodies had latched onto her legs. The quintuplets, who hadn't touched their father in years, were clinging to the maid as if she were a life raft in the middle of the ocean. Oliver buried his face in her apron. Mason was gripping her hand with both of his. Alexander watched, a strange, sharp pain piercing his chest. It wasn't relief. It was jealousy. Wait, Alexander commanded, standing up. Maya stopped, her hand resting instinctively on Noah's head. She looked at the billionaire, and for the first time, Alexander felt like the smallest person in the room. The investigation and the bond. The chaos of Black Thursday had settled into an uneasy quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the city lights to glitter like cold diamonds against the wet glass. Alexander Sterling stood in the center of his living room, a space that resembled a hotel lobby more than a home. White marble floors, white leather furniture, abstract art that cost millions but meant nothing. He was holding a glass of scotch, but he wasn't drinking. He was watching the security feed on his tablet. I don't understand, he muttered to himself. On the screen, in the nursery wing of the mansion, Maya Williams was sitting on the floor. He had hired her on the spot that night, offering a salary that made her eyes widen, though she had hesitated. She hadn't wanted the money. She had looked at the boys, seen their desperate loneliness, and accepted. Now, 3 days later, Alexander was trying to understand the anomaly she had introduced into his sterile world. On the screen, the quintuplets were building a fort, but they weren't using the imported Swedish educational blocks he had ordered. They were using cardboard boxes from the recycling bin and blankets. Maya was inside the fort with them. The audio on the security feed picked up a sound Alexander hadn't heard in 5 years. Giggling. Careful, Sir Oliver. Maya's voice came through the tablet, rich and playful. The dragon is coming. Maya made a roaring sound, and 5 identical boys shrieked with delight, scrambling over each other to hide behind her. She caught them, tickling ribs and whispering secrets. her laughter mixing with theirs in a symphony of pure, unadulterated joy. Alexander lowered the tablet. He looked at his own hand. He couldn't remember the last time he had touched his son's without worrying about getting a suit wrinkled or checking his watch. He needed to understand her. The investigation began the next morning. Alexander didn't go to the office. He stayed in his study, door ajar, observing the new ecosystem of his house. He watched as Maya navigated the morning routine. Usually, breakfast was a war zone of thrown food and screaming. Today, it was a tactical operation disguised as a game. "Captain Noah, report for fueling," Maya said, holding out a spoon of oatmeal. Noah, usually the most stubborn, opened his mouth wide. "Excellent," she praised, wiping his chin with a tenderness that made Alexander look away. "Fuel levels rising. We'll be ready for launch." She treated them with dignity. That was the difference. The previous nannies had treated them as unruly pets or miniature employees. Maya treated them as little men with big feelings. Later that afternoon, Alexander found himself drawn to the garden. He stood on the terrace, hidden by the heavy velvet drapes, watching them outside. Maya was sitting on the grass. The boys circled around her. She wasn't playing now. She was teaching. She held a flower in her hand. "You see the roots?" she asked softly. The boys nodded, mesmerized. "The roots are in the dirt. It's dark down there. But because the roots stay strong in the dark, the flower can find the sun. People are like that too." Ethan, the quietest of the five, tugged on her sleeve. He signed something with his hands. Alexander didn't know his son knew sign language. "Yes, baby," Maya replied, signing back fluently. "Even when it hurts, we grow." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. He walked back to his desk, feeling like an intruder in his own life. He pulled up Maya's personnel file on his computer. Maya Williams, 26 years old, high school valedictorian, dropped out of college to care for sick mother. Mother deceased, father unknown. Current address, the Bronx, Zone 4. She was overqualified and underestimated. She had given up her future for her family, and now she was giving her heart to his. That evening, the dynamic shifted. Alexander entered the nursery unexpectedly. The room went silent. The boys stiffened, their smiles vanishing as they looked at their father. The air grew cold. Maya stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling." "I came to say good night," Alexander said awkwardly, feeling the weight of 5 pairs of judging eyes. He walked over to the beds. He patted Liam on the head stiffly. "Good night, Liam." He moved to Mason. "Good night." It was mechanical, painful. As he turned to leave, he felt a hand on his arm. It was warm. He flinched, turning to see Maya. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice low so the boys wouldn't hear. "They aren't soldiers. You don't have to inspect them." Alexander stiffened. "I beg your pardon." "They want to be tucked in," she said, her eyes searching his, pleading for him to bridge the gap. "They want to know you're safe. Not just rich, safe." Alexander looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fatigue under her eyes, but also the burning intensity of her care. He saw a woman who possessed a wealth he couldn't liquidate or trade. "I don't know how," he admitted. The confession shocked him. He had never admitted weakness to anyone. Maya smiled. It wasn't a servant's smile. It was a woman's smile, soft, encouraging, and devastatingly beautiful. "Sit," she whispered. She guided him to the edge of Oliver's bed. "Just read. They like the sound of your voice. It's deep. It makes them feel protected." She handed him a battered copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. Alexander sat. He loosened his tie. He opened the book. His hands, which signed billion-dollar contracts without shaking, were trembling slightly. Maya stepped back into the shadows of the doorway, giving him the stage. "There was once a Velveteen Rabbit," Alexander began. His voice was rough, unpracticed in gentleness. But as he read, he saw the boys' eyelids drooping. He saw their shoulders relax. He saw Noah reach out and touch the fabric of his suit pants, just to make sure he was real. Alexander read until the room was filled with the rhythmic breathing of sleeping children. When he finally looked up, closing the book, He looked toward the door. Maya was still there. She was leaning against the doorframe, watching him with a look that wasn't awe, it was pride. For the first time in 5 years, the ice around Alexander's heart didn't just crack, it began to melt. He stood up and walked to the door. "Thank you, Maya," he said, using her first name for the first time. "You're welcome, Alexander," she replied, slipping up before correcting herself. "Mr. Sterling." But the mistake hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. As she walked away down the hall, Alexander didn't go back to his study to check the Asian markets. He went to his room, lay down in the dark, and replayed the sound of her voice saying his name. He was the master of the universe. But he was beginning to suspect that the maid held the keys to the only kingdom that mattered. The diamond trap, the golden hour of peace in the Sterling household, lasted exactly 3 weeks. In that time, the mansion had transformed from a mausoleum of wealth into a home. There were finger paintings taped to the Italian marble refrigerator. There was laughter echoing in the hallways. Alexander had even begun to leave the office at 5 o'clock, drawn home by a gravitational pull he couldn't name, but knew he needed. Then, Vanessa Thorne returned. She arrived in a whirl of designer luggage and Chanel No. 5, the click-clack of her stilettos on the foyer floor sounding like gunfire. As Alexander's fiancée and the VP of operations for Sterling Global, she had been in Tokyo closing a merger. She walked in expecting order, silence, and submission. Instead, she found a carnival. In the center of the foyer, Maya was on her hands and knees, pretending to be a horse, while Oliver and Ethan rode on her back. Alexander was standing by the staircase, not scolding them, but watching with a soft, unguarded smile that Vanessa had never seen in 3 years of dating him. "Alexander?" Vanessa's voice was sharp, cutting through the laughter like a razor blade. The scene froze. The boys scrambled off Maya's back, their faces draining of joy. They clustered together, 5 pairs of eyes widening in fear. Maya stood up quickly, smoothing her apron, breathless and flushed. "Vanessa," Alexander said, the smile vanishing instantly. He adjusted his tie, the armor sliding back into place. "You're back early." "Evidently," Vanessa said, eyeing Maya up and down with the disdain one reserves for a stain on a silk dress. "I see standards have slipped while I was away. Is this the help? Or a petting zoo?" "This is Maya," Alexander said, his voice unusually firm. "She is the nanny, and she is the reason the boys are speaking again." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She saw the way the boys clung to Maya's skirt. She saw the way Alexander defended her. In the cutthroat world of corporate acquisition, Vanessa knew a hostile takeover when she saw one. She wasn't about to lose her merger, or her marriage, to a maid from the Bronx. "Charming," Vanessa said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We have the charity gala tonight, darling. I trust the staff can manage to keep the children invisible for the evening." The dinner party that night was a masterclass in tension. The dining room was filled with the city's elite, senators, investors, and socialites. Crystal glasses clinked, and polite conversation flowed, but the air was thick with malice. Maya had been asked to help serve, as the catering staff was short-handed. She moved around the table with silent grace, pouring wine, her face neutral. Every time she passed Alexander, he would glance at her, a silent communication of apology and reassurance. Vanessa caught every glance. "Oh no!" Vanessa gasped suddenly, dropping her fork. The clatter silenced the room. She clutched her chest, her face a mask of panicked theatrics. "My brooch, the sterling rose, it's gone." Alexander frowned. "The diamond pin. You were wearing it when we sat down." "I know," Vanessa cried, standing up. "I took it off for a moment in the powder room to adjust my scarf. I left it on the vanity. It's not there." She turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, toward Maya, who was standing by the sideboard. "She was in there," Vanessa pointed a manicured finger. "The help. I saw her coming out of the powder room just before dinner." Maya froze. "Ms. Thorne, I was restocking the towels." "I didn't see any—" "Search her," Vanessa demanded, her voice trembling with fake outrage. "That brooch is worth $2 million, Alexander. It's your grandmother's legacy. Search her bag." "Vanessa, stop it," Alexander said, standing up. Maya wouldn't. If she has nothing to hide, she won't mind, Vanessa snapped. She signaled to the head of security, a burly man named Graves. Bring her tote bag. Now. The room was deadly silent. The guests watched with morbid curiosity. Maya stood tall, her chin lifted, though her hands were shaking. She knew the way the world worked for people like her. Truth didn't matter when money was talking. Graves returned with Maya's worn canvas bag. He dumped the contents onto the pristine white tablecloth. A bus pass, a library book, a half-eaten granola bar, a drawing of the Quintuplets, and wrapped in a tissue, the glimmering, diamond-encrusted sterling rose. The collective gasp of the room sucked the air out of Alexander's lungs. He stared at the diamonds sparkling amidst the poverty of Maya's belongings. The evidence was physical, undeniable. His trauma, the deep-seated belief that everyone eventually betrayed him, that everyone only wanted his money, roared to the surface. The warmth he had felt for the last 3 weeks was replaced by a cold, familiar fury. He felt foolish. He had let his guard down, and he had been robbed. Maya looked at the brooch, then at Alexander. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't beg. I did not take that. You know who I am, Mr. Sterling. You know. Alexander looked at her, his jaw clenching until it hurt. He couldn't look at the boys who were peeking through the banister rails upstairs, terrified. He had to be the CEO. He had to be strong. Get out, Alexander whispered. Sir, please. I said get out, Alexander roared, the sound shattering the stillness. Take your things and leave. If you are not off the premises in 5 minutes, I will call the police. Alexander, darling, you really should press charges, Vanessa cooed, stepping to his side and placing a hand on his arm. Just get her out of my sight, Alexander said, turning his back on Maya. Maya gathered her things with trembling hands. She didn't look at Vanessa. She looked up at the banister, where 5 small faces were pressed between the rails. She put a hand to her heart, a silent goodbye. As the heavy front door closed behind her, a sound erupted from the top of the stairs. It wasn't a cry. It was a scream, a primal, synchronized shriek of absolute despair from 5 little boys who had just watched their mother figure be thrown into the night. Alexander stood amidst the wreckage of his dinner party, the diamonds gleaming on the table, feeling colder than he had ever felt in his life. The silence and the fever. The mansion did not just go quiet after Maya left. It died. For 3 days the silence was heavy, suffocating, and unnatural. It was the silence of a tomb. The toys were untouched. The curtains were drawn. The staff moved on tiptoes, terrified of the aura radiating from Alexander's office. But the silence in the nursery was the worst of all. On the 4th morning, Alexander was woken by Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper. She didn't knock. She burst in, her face pale. Mr. Sterling, you need to come. It's the boys. Alexander ran. He sprinted down the hallway in his silk pajamas, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. When he entered the nursery, the heat hit him first. It was stifling. The Quintuplets were in their beds, thrashing, their skin flushed and angry, unnatural red. They won't wake up, Mrs. Higgins sobbed, and they're burning up. Within an hour, the nursery had been converted into a high-tech triage unit. Private doctors, the best pediatric specialists in New York, were checking monitors and running IV lines. Alexander stood in the corner, his arms crossed so tightly his knuckles were white. He watched the heart rate monitors beeping erratically. What is it? Alexander demanded, his voice cracking. Is it a virus? Meningitis? Tell me. Dr. Aris, the chief pediatrician, took off his stethoscope and looked at Alexander with a grave expression. Physically, Mr. Sterling, their blood work is clean. No infection. No virus. Then why do they have 104-degree fevers? Alexander yelled. Why aren't they waking up? It's psychosomatic, sir, Dr. Aris said quietly. It's extreme emotional distress manifesting physically. In infants and young children, we call it failure to thrive. But at this age, it's grief, systemic shock. They have given up. Alexander staggered back as if he had been punched. "Grief? They are calling for someone," the doctor said, glancing at the delirious boys. "Listen." Alexander stepped closer to Noah's bed. The boy's eyes were squeezed shut, sweat matting his hair. He was tossing his head, murmuring a single syllable over and over. "Ma, Ma, Ma." It wasn't a call for their biological mother, whom they had never known. It was a call for Maya. Alexander felt the floor tilt. He walked out of the room, unable to breathe. He needed air. He needed to think. He wandered blindly into the mudroom, the small side entrance where the staff entered and exited. It was where the boys kept their muddy boots and where Maya kept her cleaning supplies. He sat on the wooden bench, putting his head in his hands. "I killed them," he thought. "I chose a diamond over my sons' lives." His foot bumped something under the bench. He looked down. It was a crumpled piece of paper. He picked it up. It was a drawing, done in the crude, honest hand of a 5-year-old. It was drawn by Mason. The picture showed a stick figure with a crown and a scary face, labeled The Witch. The witch was standing over a bag labeled Maya. The witch had a shiny yellow rock in her hand and was putting it into the bag. In the corner of the drawing, Mason had written, "Bad lady trick daddy." Alexander stared at the paper. The lines were shaky, but the message was clear. Mason had seen it. "The mudroom," Alexander whispered. He looked up. In the corner of the ceiling, obscured by a high shelf, was a small, dome-shaped camera. It was an old backup security system installed by the previous owner, separate from the main grid. Vanessa knew about the main cameras. She didn't know about this one. Alexander ran to his office. He bypassed the main security terminal and logged into the legacy server. He typed in the date of the dinner party. Time, 6:45 p.m. The grainy black and white footage loaded. Alexander watched, his soul turning to ash. He saw Vanessa enter the mudroom. She looked around to check if the coast was clear. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the sterling rose. She opened Maya's tote bag, which was hanging on a hook. She dropped the brooch inside, then wiped her fingerprints off the bag with a tissue. She smiled, a cold, victorious smirk, and walked out. Alexander paused the video on that smile. The rage that filled him now was different from the anger he had felt at the dinner. That had been hot and reactive. This was cold. This was absolute. It was the wrath of a father who realized he had let a viper into his nest and exiled the dove. He picked up his phone. He dialed Vanessa. "Alexander?" she answered, her voice bright. "I'm just at the jeweler's getting the clasp fixed on the rose. Are we still on for the—" "You are fired," Alexander said. His voice was dead flat. "Excuse me. Honey, the signal is bad. You are fired from Sterling Global, effective immediately. Your access cards are deactivated. Your accounts are frozen, pending an investigation into corporate espionage and theft." "Alexander, have you lost your mind?" Vanessa shrieked. "And," Alexander continued, his voice dropping an octave, "if you ever come within 5 miles of my children or my house again, I will release the footage of what you did in the mudroom to every news outlet in the country. You won't just be single, Vanessa. You will be a pariah." He hung up before she could scream. He threw the phone onto the desk. It didn't make him feel better. The victory was hollow. He looked at the monitors. The billions of dollars, the stock charts, the empire. It meant nothing. Down the hall, his 5 sons were dying of broken hearts because he was a fool who couldn't tell the difference between a diamond and a star. Alexander stood up. He grabbed his car keys. He didn't call his driver. He didn't call his security detail. He had to fix this. And he knew, with terrifying clarity, that money wasn't going to work this time. He was going to a place where his name meant nothing, to beg a woman who owed him nothing, to save the only thing he had left. He ran out into the rain. The redemption and the new beginning. The GPS on the dashboard of the Bugatti Chiron seemed confused. It wasn't used to routing to this part of the city. The sleek, multi-million-dollar machine navigated the potholes of the Bronx like a spaceship that had crash-landed on an alien planet. Alexander gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the neon signs of pawn shops and 24-hour bodegas. He had no security detail, no assistant, no armor, just the drawing of the witch in his pocket and the desperate knowledge that his time was running out. He pulled up to the address listed in the personnel file. It wasn't a house. It was a laundromat with a small diner attached to the side called Sal's Corner. Alexander stepped out. The air here smelled different: fried onions, exhaust, and ozone. It smelled alive. He felt absurd in his three-piece Italian suit, the mud of the street splashing onto his polished Oxfords. He pushed open the door to the diner. A bell chimed. The noise inside, the clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, the hum of conversation, died instantly. Every head turned. The local patrons stared at the intruder, who looked like he had walked out of a Forbes cover shoot and gotten lost. Alexander ignored them. He scanned the room, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then he saw her. Maya was sitting in a booth at the back, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was staring into a cup of black coffee, as if it held the secrets of the universe. She looked smaller than she had in the mansion, stripped of her uniform, but wrapped in a cloak of sadness that was palpable from across the room. Alexander walked toward her. His legs felt heavy. Maya sensed him before she saw him. She looked up. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with a sudden, sharp intake of breath. She straightened her spine, her dignity instantly rushing back to shield her. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice steady but cold, "if you are here to accuse me of something else, I suggest you leave. I have nothing left for you to take." Alexander stopped at the edge of the table. He didn't sit. He looked at the woman who had brought magic into his sterile life, and he saw the damage his distrust had caused. "I didn't come to accuse you," Alexander said, his voice raspy. "I came to surrender." Maya frowned, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Surrender? I saw the video," Alexander said, the words tumbling out. "The mudroom camera. I saw Vanessa. I saw everything." Maya's shoulders slumped slightly, a release of tension she had been holding for days. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just nodded slowly. "I see. I fired her," Alexander continued, stepping closer. "But that doesn't fix what I broke. I was a fool, Maya. I let my fear of being used blind me to the only person who was actually giving. You hurt me, Alexander," she said softly, using his name intentionally. "You looked at me and saw a thief because that's what your world taught you to see." "I know," he whispered, "and I will spend the rest of my life apologizing for it. But right now, I am not asking for me." He took a breath, the hardest breath of his life. "It's the boys." Maya stood up instantly, the coffee cup rattling in its saucer. The maternal instinct that Alexander had mistaken for employee diligence flared in her eyes. "What happened? Are they okay?" "They are dying, Maya." The color drained from her face. "They have given up," Alexander said, his voice breaking, tears finally spilling over his iron mask. "The doctors call it failure to thrive. They stopped eating. They stopped sleeping. Now the fevers are so high. They are fading. They are waiting for you." He did something then that silenced the entire diner. Alexander Sterling, the titan of industry, the man who moved markets with a whisper, dropped to his knees on the sticky linoleum floor of a Bronx diner. He didn't care about the suit. He didn't care about the audience. He looked up at her, hands open. "I have billions of dollars," he choked out, "and I cannot buy a single second of their health. You are the only wealth we have. Please, come home." Maya looked down at him. She saw the desperation, the raw humanity of a father stripped of his ego. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man drowning. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for a raise. She didn't ask for an apology in writing. She grabbed her purse. "Get up," she commanded gently, offering him her hand. "Drive. Fast." The drive back to the estate was a blur of speed and silence. Maya sat in the passenger seat, her eyes closed, whispering prayers in a rhythm that Alexander found strangely soothing. When they burst through the front doors of the mansion, the atmosphere was funereal. The staff lined the hallway, faces pale. Dr. Aris met them at the top of the stairs, looking grim. "Mr. Sterling," the doctor began, shaking his head. "Their vitals are dropping. Noah's heart rate is—" Maya didn't wait for the medical report. She pushed past the doctor and threw open the doors to the nursery. The room was filled with the beep hiss of machines. The quintuplets lay in their beds, 5 small pale figures hooked up to IVs, looking terrifyingly still. Alexander stopped at the door, terrified to enter, terrified that he was too late. Maya walked into the center of the room. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She took a deep breath and began to hum. It was the melody from The Office, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." But she hummed it with a deep, soulful resonance that seemed to vibrate against the walls. "My babies," she whispered, moving to Noah's bed first. She placed her cool hand on his burning forehead. "Mama is here. I'm here." She moved to Liam, then Ethan, Mason, and Oliver, touching each one, speaking their names like a benediction. "Come back to me," she commanded softly. "The witch is gone. The castle is safe. Come back." Alexander watched from the doorway, holding his breath. At first, nothing happened. The machines beeped their monotonous rhythm. Then, a spike. Noah's heart rate monitor beeped faster. His eyelids fluttered. A small, dry croak escaped his throat. Maya?" Maya leaned down, pressing her cheek against his. "I've got you, Captain. I've got you." One by one, like lights turning on in a house after a blackout, the boys stirred. The presence of the one person who made them feel safe did what the strongest antibiotics could not. It lowered their cortisol, slowed their hearts, and broke the fever. Ethan opened his eyes and reached out a hand. Maya took it. Then Mason reached out. Within 20 minutes, the terrified silence of the deathbed had been replaced by the soft, weak sounds of weeping, but it was the weeping of relief. Dr. Aris stood beside Alexander, checking the monitors in disbelief. "I have practiced medicine for 30 years, he muttered. "I have never seen anything like this. Her presence, it's a biological imperative for them." Alexander didn't look at the doctor. He watched Maya sitting on the floor between the beds, holding 5 hands, tears streaming down her face, smiling as life returned to his world. He realized then that he hadn't just hired a nanny. He had found the missing piece of his soul. 2 weeks later, the nursery was no longer a hospital. It was a fortress of chaos once again. The boys were fully recovered, their energy doubling as if to make up for lost time. It was a warm evening. Alexander found Maya on the balcony overlooking the city lights. She was wearing a simple evening dress he had bought for her, not as a uniform, but as a gift. She was looking out at the skyline, a glass of wine in her hand. "They are asleep," she said as he approached. Mason tried to negotiate for 5 more minutes, but I told him the dream train was leaving the station. Alexander chuckled. The sound felt natural now. "You run a tighter ship than my COO. He stood beside her, looking out at the city that he used to think he owned. Now he knew he was just a tenant. "Maya," he said, turning to face her. She looked at him. The tension of employer and employee was gone, replaced by a deep, simmering connection forged in the fire of the crisis. "I have the papers ready," Alexander said. Maya stiffened slightly. "Papers?" "For the boys," Alexander said quickly. "I'm firing the board of directors for their trust fund. I want to appoint a legal guardian, someone who has absolute authority over their well-being, equal to mine. If anything happens to me, I want them to be yours, legally." Maya's eyes widened. "Alexander, that is a huge responsibility." "I trust no one else," he said. "But there is another paper." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a contract. He pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel this time. He stood tall, meeting her gaze as an equal. "I don't want you to be the nanny, Maya. I don't want to pay you to love my children, because I know you do it for free, and I don't want to live in this house another day without you by my side. Not in the nursery. Here, with me. He opened the box. It wasn't the sterling rose. It was a new ring. A sapphire, deep and blue like the ocean, surrounded by 5 small diamonds. "I love you," Alexander said, the words feeling like a liberation. "You saved my fortune with a code. You saved my sons with a song. And you saved me. Just by being you. Will you marry us?" Maya looked at the ring, then at the man who had driven into the Bronx to beg on his knees. She saw the change in him. The ice was gone. She smiled, and it was brighter than the city lights below. "Yes," she whispered. "I will marry us." Epilogue. 5 years later, the office of Sterling Global was buzzing with activity, but it was no longer the cold, fearful place it had been. There were photos on the desks. There was noise. Alexander Sterling sat at his desk, his hair graying slightly at the temples, lending him a distinguished air. He was on a video call with the Prime Minister of Japan, but he looked distracted. "Daddy! Daddy! Look!" The heavy oak doors burst open. 5 10-year-old boys stormed in. They were no longer identical clones in matching outfits. Noah wore a soccer jersey. Liam had glasses and a science kit. Ethan was carrying a sketchbook. Mason had a skateboard. Oliver was holding a violin. They were individuals. Loud, happy, distinct individuals. Behind them walked Maya, looking radiant in a business suit, carrying a toddler girl on her hip. Their daughter, Hope. "Sorry to interrupt the merger," Maya laughed, though she didn't look sorry at all. "But someone promised to judge the science fair project before dinner." Alexander smiled, a genuine ear-to-ear grin. He looked at the Prime Minister on the screen. "Mr. Prime Minister, I'm afraid I have a critical board meeting with my senior consultants. We will have to reconvene tomorrow." He closed the laptop on a billion-dollar deal without a second thought. He stood up and was immediately tackled by his sons. As he wrestled them on the expensive rug, laughing, his eyes drifted to the wall behind his desk. There, framed in simple black wood, was a printout of a computer screen. System failure. It was the only failure Alexander Sterling was proud of. It was the moment his system had crashed, so his life could finally reboot. Okay, Alexander laughed, lifting Hope into the air. "Who wants pizza?" The chorus of "me" echoed through the penthouse, louder and more valuable than any stock bell, ringing out over the city that shone bright, but never as bright as the family inside. The end.